What's happening, fellas? It's your boy Hardcorn, and today we've got something very special for you. It's Miss Kousaka Shizuru, the long-awaited addition to Action Taimanin. I've been waiting for her for a long-ass time, and I'm glad to see she's finally here. And she's alright. She's almost pretty good, in fact. But let's go over her. To start off, she's a suppressed character and a human type, so if you have any suppressed supporters, anything that boosts humans, you're in the ballpark for her. She uses whips. These are a semi-long range weapon. They're melee category, and they do a lot of hits, but not a lot of damage. As you can see here, her base damage right here is 3360. That puts her in like an okay range, but her base damage scaling on her basic attacks leaves a lot to be desired. She also has an incredibly high amount of defense and base HP. So she's packing some real heat behind her, so she can take a hit with some of the best. In terms of skills though, they all revolve in some way around her whip. She obviously has the aerial rave. Queen's whip is just a modified version of Asagi's, except it has much larger range and slashes. Whip grip is a tentacle anchor, but it brings them to her, while chasing strike is her other version of her gripping attack that brings her to them. Though this one is for inflicting debuffs, and this one is also for debuffs as well, so you can choose your needs to whichever you want. Sprout Garden is really unique in that it's one of the few times that a character gets an AoE heal and also a slow at the same time. It's like Emily's healing field, except that it has, well, a slow inside. They have to be inside the slow though, inside the range of this in order for it to work. So they can actually jump out of it many times if you don't have the sort of area of effect behind it. Plant Invades interesting. She throws a ranged attack. It's essentially two Destructo Discs she puts into the ground, and it goes to an enemy and just plants a bomb onto him. It also knocks him into the air. That's a nice pseudo stun. Plant Wall is one of my favorite attacks though, because it allows her to get in there. Well, she can take a hit, and then it instantly appears with a nice wall in front of her. This wall persists too for at least like 2 seconds, so enemies can actually, like, if they try to get a follow-up attack on Shizuru, they run into the wall and take a ton of damage at the same time. It's very, very useful. Whenever I've been using Shizuru, I end up taking a Plant Wall over a Sprout Garden, because if I'm taking a hit, I want something that can like prevent a follow-up from happening. Whip Shot's pretty cool, because she just dodges. It's her dodge and attack move, but it creates a small ball in front of her right here that does slight AoE damage, but it's also a multi-hit attack. At 9 seconds, you can spam this all the time. It's really nice. It's really fun to use. But her Taimanin art is really something to behold. It gives her 30% more damage, and of course the particle charge. But it gives her a super armor final hit of an attack, which is very good because she has to stand still for most of her attacks and only walks forward for at least like 2 swings. So if she's going to hold still, because that's how a whip works. And Rose Rondo, of course, is a nice circular AoE. It's very, very strong. Well, with reds you can usually go into the sort of stuff where it goes, you get a high crit chance on it. So this thing goes up like the hundreds of thousands of damage in one single button press. And it has incredible range, applies a debuff, and it has a damage boost inside of it as well. So it's just asking for critical rate increase and critical damage. But of course, Chasing Strike, the 81 skill, it's just her Devil Bringer. It does damage. It does really good damage, in fact. But but also, it's extremely dangerous to use against high-level enemies due to the fact, she brings herself towards them. Same thing with Whip Grip. You bring the danger essentially to yourself. And Shizuru has a long wind-up on her basic attack animation. We'll see that later. This is probably something you use to, get in there for the straggler ranged enemies. It stuns on impact, and that's on 8 seconds, which can be reduced, I think, down to, 6 seconds. I don't know how long the stun lasts, but I hope you can chain it. It would work similar to how Murasaki's Tentacle Anchor works, but they all provide good buffs. And damage increase, of course, is always worthwhile, so you can get in there with Chasing Strike. The moment you land and can be active again, you can use Rose Rondo because it's a hold dodge. She's got a lot of synergy there, so it's a pretty solid stuff for the most part. So at first we'll be trying a blue build with some red inside as well. Of course we'll be taking Sakura in there for her buff that gives it, you know, the ability to make timed buffs last. Su Jinglei's supporter for the ability of super armor on that, and not super armor because that's a main girl supporter. Bonus attack on every hit. This is actually really nice for Shizuru because all of her whipping strikes hit 1,000,000 times. So if you can keep constantly hitting, you can do stuff like she can now gain like 30% more damage. That's so welcome. And of course, she has very good synergy with her own supporter. She's a suppressed type, so she gets increased critical damage, critical hit rate, and increased damage to debuff enemies. If you can find some way to debuff enemies, like within blue builds, you're able to actually get a lot of stuff going on. So let's give her a try. Let's see how she fares against some of the game's tougher enemies. See, even that, I'm at level 81 and I still do 6,000 damage. But it's also something to note that Chasing Strike has that really big AoE inside of it. Because I just hit like 4 enemies at the same time with that. It's actually pretty insane stuff. It's also something to note too that Shizuru's basic attack is a piercing projectile. So that means it can hit 4 or 5 enemies at once. A lot of her attacks end up piercing as well, which is very, very beneficial if you're trying to sweep up, you know, small enemies and all that sort of stuff. Shizuru very much excels in the aspect of when you get your enemy stunned or slowed down, you can actually just totally wail on them for the most part. Because of how generally fast her attacks are, except for the initial startup. Like that first attack right there, that took like almost 3/4 of a second to get off. That's not the best situation, but you have to plan for that sort of stuff. It's like Shiranui or Murasaki with how slow their attacks are. Except Murasaki gets armor, and Shiranui's is, I think, slightly faster. And when you're in a small area like this, like look at that. I'm at least 3 or 4 meters away, so that's probably the extent of her range you can get to. But if you get caught at the very end of her attack string, and you keep mashing the button, you're just gonna get hit. Because she stands still for most of it. But she excels in small areas. If the enemies can't find a way to, you know, get out, they're pretty much screwed in that sort of sense. Because her whip takes up a huge amount of space. And does pretty respectable damage. Because all of her damage is backloaded, similar to Noah's. But if you can start stacking critical chance, it's worth it. She really just tears the heads off everything that she comes against. Because your sort of Devil Bringer attack, where you double tap dodge and it brings her to them, actually does a lot of damage. And since it's available on like such short notice, you can actually just use it flat out anywhere, really. Rose Rondo is also one of those attacks you can take because it's very strong, even in like low level stages. It's balanced by the fact that also it's got an extremely long cooldown. I think it had 19 seconds behind it. But it's still worth taking in general because it's a 360-degree AoE. It's comparable to something like Rondo for Shiranui, or... It's comparable to Shiranui's Rondo, Murasaki's Axe Spin, Asagi's 81 skill. Anything that really has a 360-degree spin to it. And right there, that's Rose Rondo is also really good for getting out on a... After taking a hit and you wake up, you obviously don't have much room to attack in. So it's really good to go, like, you know, just hold dodge the moment you wake up. And just let it rip. She turns into a full-on Beyblade and just spins into death. Let's see that super. But Shizuru in general is really good for building stacks on a lot of weapons. Either weapon skills or a passive on a supporter. Because as you can see right there, she's hitting like 6 times per like every 2 swings. So it's very, very valuable to have something that can generate that requires a lot of stack generation. Like right now, I got the supporter, the Sujing Lei in the main. And I've got tons of super armor all the time. Because I make that 15% chance, I think it is, happen a lot more often. But of course, since she holds still for some of this, since she has to hold still a lot, she has to move around, which makes her attack have to restart all the time, and it's very, very slow for her. So that's something to consider if you consider taking her along with that sort of supporter setup. But since she attacks so very often, those Momochi weapons or the rebellious weapons, those are really, really good on her. Because she can apply a ton of stacks to the crowd and reduce their defense essentially to nothing. So here's Shizuru's unique debuff, is Seed Bomb. Some of her skills can inflict Seed Bomb, so this is what it does. It inflicts a slow, blows up in 3 seconds, and inflicts area damage. So they essentially turn into corpse bombs. That's very nice since it plays into her AoE playstyle. That's good. 3 seconds though is a while, so it's good for enemies that end up having a lot of like bloat behind them, like a boss or something. But the slow is also very nice too. So now that we looked at blue, let's take a look at red. So here's your typical red build I like to use. I usually like to use Spica because, well, obviously she has the invincibility aspect, but also that she comes with critical rate 14% up for melee characters. That's really, really nice. Lydia Beretta also gets the chance to damage dealt to everybody and damage of all attacks by 18% for criticals. That's really good to make, just Shizuru hit you that much harder. And of course, classic Shizuru to make her critical rate just skyrocket that much, along with, increased damage to debuff enemies. Shizuru can give debuffs, like, all the time. And also, if you have the Shinganji Kurenai supporter, the one that came out a few months ago, at least, the one that has, like, it came out the nice supporter package or whatever, that one had a very nice skill where it does 50% more damage on every critical hit. On a character like Shizuru that can actually get, like, a lot of high critical chance, she wants critical damage. And you can get it in red, because that supporter was red for it. That was really, really, really nice, because it actually makes, like, critical hits, like, just explosively powerful. But of course, she would need to almost 5-5 that supporter to get any real benefit out of it. At least I think I did. Don't quote me on that sort of thing, it's something I have to remember. So we'll be taking Rose Rondo, her Taimanin art, Plant Wall, and Chasing Strike. We can opt for Whip Grip instead of Chasing Strike. We don't do damage with Whip Grip, but we get the ability to give a defense down debuff. That's a huge one too, at 30%. So let's take her on the road and see where she goes. As you can see right there, almost every single one of my hits crits with this. So if you got critical damage Magatamas, they're your man. Man, look at this. It's not a very good example, but it was good enough. Shizuru is also fortunate enough to have the ability to abuse the fact of when you hit multiple enemies at the same time, their sound effects stack and it's really, really loud. All the time. Why did I say Whip Grip didn't do damage? It does do damage. I'm thinking of something else. Rose Rondo is not armored either, so you gotta get in there and use it at the right time. The Whip Grip is a very, very, very strong AoE attack. Granted, it's not, as strong as Rose Rondo, but it's worthwhile to take. Like, I just bring all the bosses to me, and I just end up destroying them. Yeah, it's a really good indicator of playstyle right there when I use Whip Grip and I try to move faster, but the enemies spawn in, so I have to, time my dodges a lot better. She's got some wind up on Whip Grip though, along with her Devil Bringer. So you have to watch out for that sort of stuff if you're going to take it with you. Her supporter has really good synergy with her because of the fact it's just within her range to use. So she can keep inflicting a slow and also get that debuff. Get that debuff bonus off. Oh, that's perfect. Because you actually got to visualize just how it works. It comes in from the left and it swipes. It doesn't cover her right though. So I was mistaken that it comes in an arc like that. That's enough out of red though. Let's see what she looks like in green. So we're gonna take the bog standard critical build. I got a melee damage supporter. Kaoru, of course, for her massive critical damage boost. And Sakuragi Saruga for the critical rate and also critical damage. Very, very strong build. Any character that has a lot of hits and also crit chance can really take advantage of this. And Shizuru has that. Or at least my Shizuru does, in terms of critical hit chance. So we're going to take something like Chasing Strike for the ability to bring her towards them, because Queen's Grip requires her to get in a lot closer. And of course we'll take Plant Wall again because it's her very good contingency for enemies that try to gang up on her. And Queen's Whip is her big green skill. That's very, very nice because it works just like Asagi's in that, you know, damage reduction, more attacks, and also a huge critical hit rate increase. And we're running critical hit rate supporters. So this thing is just going to melt through whatever it comes up against. So let's give it a go. Let's see what she does. No problem. Amazing. You need some degree of cooldown investment though. Make sure you get that in there. Thankfully she just has enough of ability to walk forward when she attacks, so that I can actually, you know, move towards an enemy that just walks out of the way. It's better than Asagi's in that aspect. Oop. Of course, those gunner enemies always getting me. She's very good at hitting things behind her, even with her when she faces forward, because her attacks are so huge. Uh-oh, I got reversed. Thank God it has tracking. Shizuru is not going to have as fast as clears as someone like Emily though, because of how generally slow her attacks are. She also takes a hellacious amount of stat investment to actually make her this usable. I have a 2-5 weapon and a 4-5 weapon as well, so it takes all kinds of stats just to make her do this much damage. If you do not have any of these sort of stats behind you, you're not going to make a lot of damage work. It's similar to Tokiko in that way. It's more or less with Shizuru getting used to the fact that she has a slow startup and has to hold still a lot. Of course. Of course I get hit by that. The no-look pass, the no-look finish. And of course, when she gets up against something that's spongy like that, that is a very difficult situation. Because if you don't have enough damage to grind it down, they may just out-tank her. Granted, I'm not running the most optimal situation. Didn't get a lot of crits, unfortunately. And of course, now we enter my favorite part, the theoretical ventures. Now I'm gonna go think about what supporters work with what else. So we're still in green. We're gonna go look at what it takes to make, you know, various other stuff. Queen's Whip, critical rate. I've obviously got that going on. So green with Sprout Garden is make higher heals, makes the targets groggy, so whoever gets hit gets to essentially sit still. Plant Wall makes an attack down buff. Oh, I never used Whip Shot. Oh, that's right, you can't use Whip Shot with Queen's Whip. And I would rather have Queen's Whip than Whip Shot itself on that, that's right. But this is a nice move to take whenever you want to have something like a nice quick skill to use, because it's 9 seconds, similar to Strike and Grip. It's essentially available when you need it. But she has to hold still for this attack though, and that's an unfortunate situation with her. Is that she has to hold still. Of course, everybody has to hold still in some aspect, but if she gets in close or gets hit in the back, she's going to take a lot of damage. And of course, there's no reason not to take Thorn Rose. It's much better than whatever she's got, right? If you don't take this, essentially, like, she's not going to do any damage. And she already has difficulty making a huge amount of damage, but she can do damage regardless. Green doesn't really have a lot of synergy on her, due to the fact that she's got, you know, it's just stun, groggy, let's control, damage up, and you only really have this skill to do a ton of damage with. It really relies on her basic attack. Sprout Garden, that's... I like the idea of the skill that I can have a sort of sustain with her, and also the ability to slow enemies, but it's not the best. It goes on extreme dodge, and it's really meant for her to use in conjunction with Queen's Whip. Like you use Sprout Garden, and then you get off your Queen's Whip so you can actually tank a whole bunch of damage during the attack. Like you get a 50% off, and also a heal by 50%. I think it heals like, I don't have any healing bonuses, so the last time I did it, it healed like 150 health a tick. So it's pretty solid healing, but I mean, you're still taking a ton of damage inside. I damn near died on that last boss fight because I didn't have any sort of healing. And of course I was being stupid and got cocky and got caught up in 4 of those rock blasts. I don't see much hope in green unless you really have a bunch of crits behind you, and in terms of crit chance, but it's doable. It can be made to work. So let's look at some synergistic aspects of the red supporters. So we got damage buff, damage defense down, range increase, bonus damage, defense down. So that means any enemy that gets hit inside this AoE right here, they get a 20% off. Plant wall, defense up, can't use really well. Enemy defense down, that's really good, that's a nice debuff. Sprout Garden makes the AoE larger. That's actually very much needed because the AoE is very small in the first place. So obviously red is going to want her to do as much damage as possible to whatever's in her way. Chasing Strike, you can obviously, any enemy that's in between her and there can get hit at the same time. I think they got used earlier in the mission where I took out 4 enemies with it. Makes her hitbox insanely huge. Defense down, that's really good, and it drills whatever's right there for a good amount of damage. That probably would have been very good to take on there instead of Queen's Whip against that type of boss that has a defense up, so that because it essentially negated what was going on right there. So you'd use a Shizuru supporter or the Suzune supporter, anything really that has a defense, that has an attack damage bonus to debuffed enemies. Because Shizuru can inflict a lot of these defense downs in red. This sort of looks like what it's going to be her premier build is, at least from what I can see. Plant Invade though has some potential. I really liked what it's trying to go on inside of that, but I mean, I had to take 3 blues and she doesn't have those defense down buffs in blue. But this is a great skill. It's 360-degree spin, hits everybody, does a huge amount of damage. I love it to death. I would try to take this anywhere if I could. Whip Shot's really nice, and I unfortunately haven't shown it off yet, but it's worthwhile to take. Because you can use it essentially every time, and you can do it as usually like a pick skill. Because the first hit will inflict 20% damage down, and then the rest of the hits will just shred for damage. Very, very good. Very good skill. Whip Grip. Unfortunately I said it doesn't do damage. It does do damage, because I was thinking of something else. I think it's very, very good. Because it travels in an arc, but it only covers about 120 degrees in front of her. It doesn't cover her furthest right side. Very good pick though, very good stuff. And you never use this, ever. I would like to see myself use Sprout Garden more, but I couldn't see myself doing it. Unless it was in a more confined area, like I should have taken it last time instead of Plant Wall, because it's a very good item to have in a small area, because all the enemies will be scrunched together and they'll fit inside of the AoE, and she'll be able to heal. And that's really important. All that sort of healing sort of stuff just makes me wish they brought back lifesteal weapons from the first day of release. Because only Asagi, Sakura, and Yukikaze have lifesteal weapons, and they're really, really good. And now let's look at blue and see what kind of synergy they bring. So Micah is really, really good on Shizuru as well. Shizuru can inflict Seed Bomb, that's an ailment. So that means, you debuff an enemy, she's going to get 20% more damage. Unfortunately, I started the game too late. I was too weak to get the maximum supporter, but she's worth it. Very good supporter to use. Sadly, that's also one of the only debuff supporters in blue. So you have to get used to that sort of stuff. Because blue is her debuffer build. So you can get a speed debuff on strike. Grip, you get movement speed increase. So it really depends on what you want to do. Because Plant Invades your signature skill you're going to be using a lot. 14 seconds, that's nothing. That's, I think, a 9-second cooldown when you get to like level 25 skill training. So you either want to decide if you want to use your Bringer to make them slow down, or use Grip to speed yourself up. I like the idea to speed myself up, because it makes her whips that much faster. Because you can actually move out of the way of something. And also, it can translate to other skills as well. Like, if you have the audacity to bring something like Queen's Whip along with you, you whip Grip first, and then use Queen's Whip. It makes the attack super duper fast. That's 20% movement speed. That's really nice. Sprout Garden has the, speed debuff. They already are very slow inside there, and then it makes them even slower, so it's kind of redundant. You essentially, if you really wanted to, you could actually Sprout Garden and Whip Grip. No, Sprout Garden and Chasing Strike, and they won't move at all. It's essentially like almost a 100% speed decrease. Plant Wall, though, that's a really efficient way to, set up Seed Bomb on a bunch of targets, because they'll run into it. Except, you have to get hit to use Plant Wall. That's not the best. So you gotta put your best defensive supporters on, and hope to God she doesn't take a huge amount of damage. And of course, Whip Shot's all about planting Seed Bombs. And that Seed Bomb essentially makes her a big AoE damage character. Like, you wait 3 seconds and everybody explodes. So I think that'll do it, though. We'll conclude on Shizuru. Shizuru is a very solid character. She's pretty middle of the road. She's not going to be like the best character you're ever going to have. There's other characters that can do what she can do a lot better. Most notably Yukikaze, with her ability to, shoot her guns, be range damage, and have a lot of, very nice supporter skills in general. Shizuru requires you to know that she's going to be slow. She may have fast dashes, but her whipping attacks have a wind-up to them. You're going to have slow first initial strikes, and then you're going to have, the fast ones at the very end, when she's standing still and whipping all around. That's something to get used to. I know it took me a while to get used to that sort of stuff, but it's worthwhile to take. If you like her, she's worth it. But if you're not much a fan of her, you're not going to get a lot out of her. She requires very heavy investment to get anything worthwhile out of. Like, I mean it. You have to get essentially weapons like a 4-5 arena weapon, a 2-5 right there, just to make her stats high enough to do anything meaningful. Her skills are very strong. Very, very strong, in fact. So you have to get used to using your skills more often. And as your cooldowns start reducing further, you can, do a whole bunch of damage with those. I enjoy her because I enjoy her character a lot. I also like the whip sort of playstyle and making enemies get sick with tons of debuffs. If that sort of playstyle isn't for you, I wouldn't recommend Shizuru. But if you like her, and you like making enemies very sick, or having unique debuffs placed on them, she's your girl. She's great. She's great in that aspect. But she comes with a series of skills that just really... they come from other characters that can be done better on them, but she does it in her unique way. It's a sort of a learning curve of sorts. Because you have to get used to that whipping that makes her hold still, but it's just enough distance to snag enemies that are walking backwards. But you also have to get used to the fact that she's just got carbon copies of... she has 2 of Murasaki's tentacle anchors. Asagi's Satsujinka, or I forget what the skill is called, the green one. She has that, like, in 100%. And essentially, Rondo ripped right off of Shiranui. She's the conglomeration of, like, 3 characters, so it's a nice jack-of-all-trades situation, which is actually very fitting to her character, because she's, an infiltration specialist. She's got to be good in tons of different scenarios. She's not exactly a master of those scenarios, she's just good enough. But I'll leave it at that. Shizuru, you're just good enough, girl. In order to be great though, you have to master one aspect, and she can't do that. And I'll leave it to the rest of you to decide how you want to use her. So that's it. That's your boy Hardcorn with the little Shizuru first look. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.